What do you make of these reports and these pictures that we're getting from Caracas?
Well, Anna, we've been waiting for it. It was clear in the run-up to Christmas that something was likely to happen because the force that the United States has had in the Caribbean, this big naval force of assault landing ship, the Iwo Jima, the Gerald R. Ford, the biggest aircraft carrier in the world, 2 cruisers, 2 destroyers, a submarine, troop ships. They couldn't keep all of that at sea and ready to go forever. They had to either use it or stand it down. And there's a big air presence been put into Puerto Rico. The Americans have got an air base called Roosevelt Roads, commonly known as Rusi Roads, in Puerto Rico. And they've got F-35s operating from there. They've had even some of the B-52 bombers have overflown Venezuela a little while ago. And they've got the 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit available, which is a group of about 10,000 or 3 to 10,000 Marines who could be put together for a land operation. So this force was never going to be sort of held at readiness and then just stood down without something happening. And we were waiting for something to happen. Now, I think as Stuart said, President Trump said a couple of weeks ago, just before Christmas, that an air attack had taken place on a port facility, but he didn't report any more than that. And there were no real reports coming out of Venezuela. But this is a pretty confirmed report. As you said, 4 places, Caracas, Miranda, Aragua, and Nagaria, all of whom the Venezuelans are saying have been hit. And that's certainly logical. I've seen a couple of reports in the last 4 or 5 minutes that the international airport in Caracas may have been one of the targets. That's unconfirmed. That's just something that's coming up on social media. So I think we'll get a lot more in the next hour as to what these targets really are. What the purpose behind them is harder to determine. The fact that Trump was likely to launch some form of military action, I think, was 90% certain from before Christmas. But what he's trying to achieve here is not entirely clear. I mean, I think there's 2 big strategic motives behind all this. One is to attack the boats, and over 30 boats have now been attacked. Over 100 people have been killed without any evidence that they are who the Americans say they are, but that's what they've done. And what they're trying to do is send a message to all of the drug dealers in the whole region, not just in Venezuela, which mainly traffics drugs from Colombia. It doesn't produce all that many itself, but it traffics them for sure. But to send a message to all of the drug dealers that this is not a good time to be setting off on boats to come to the United States or anywhere else for that matter. So there's a general deterrent message there. But the other message is to the Maduro government that your time is up and that that you've got to leave government now. And Maduro had offered, as it were, some tough terms. He might have stood down on terms that the Americans found unacceptable. That goes back a couple of months. And so he's been sitting tight, obviously deciding that the Americans won't dare to land troops in Venezuela because that would be very, very unpopular in the United States. So what are they trying to do by launching some sort of bombing campaign to create a sense of crisis, maybe to bring the opposition out onto the streets? And Maria Machado, the leader of the opposition, who won the Nobel Peace Prize, remember, about a month ago, I mean, she wrote a very interesting article in The Economist about 3 weeks ago now, saying that, you know, the opposition hasn't been lying low. I mean, we are being arrested, but we are planning. We have an organization that is ready to take over government, and you don't see it, but it's there. Now, whether that's true or not, we don't know. But she was making it pretty clear that the opposition are in a position throughout the country to take over. But that will be easier said than done because, you know, Maduro, who's got an army of 100,000 troops, none of them will die for him, but a lot of them have got a big, big stake in the drug trafficking that goes on in Venezuela. And he's got a paramilitary force twice that size, about 220,000 paramilitaries. So he's probably got a force of maybe 10 or 20,000 very loyal troops and paramilitaries who won't die for him, but they will certainly try to preserve their position, and they won't easily give up power because the Americans are bombing a few sites.
Yeah, and as we were just saying in the last few minutes, the Venezuelan government clearly pinning the blame on the United States here. They're calling it military aggression by the Trump administration. But we have had no confirmation, no word from America for this. So it's still not confirmed the source of these strikes. But we have had details, as we've been saying, Michael, about the locations that the explosions have been heard, the attacks, as the Venezuelan government is calling them. Caracas so Miranda, Aragua and La Guaira states. What do we know about those areas and where those explosions are being heard and seen there? What might the targets be if it is the result of strikes?
Yeah, population areas. I mean, areas that are important to the economy of Venezuela. And so this is, in a sense, an example of the fact that the United States could do a lot of damage to the government and to the infrastructure of Venezuela. I mean, on the map you're seeing there, you see what a big country Venezuela is. And like a lot of countries in Latin America, most of the population lives nearer the coast than the interior. And the highlands, the further south you go, the more you're into the highlands. And indeed, the highlands of Venezuela and Guyana, next door there to the east of Venezuela, is the site of the old El Dorado. You know, from the 15th, 16th centuries, people died trying to find the legendary city of gold in El Dorado, which was somewhere in the highlands of Venezuela or Guyana. Of course, they never found it because it didn't exist. But it is mysterious country. It's beautiful Amazonian country. So there's not a huge, great population there. Most of the population is nearer the coast, and that's where the industry is. That's where the oil extraction is. And one of the companies that is very important to all of this is Chevron. The American oil company Chevron has big interest in Venezuela. And you know, all the things that the Americans say about Maduro, say he's leading a narco-terrorist government, that they're up to their eyes in narcotics and so on, which is partly true, but not entirely true. The one thing that the Americans won't do is to declare Venezuela to be a terrorist state. Because if they did, Chevron's operations would all be illegal. So they criticize Venezuela in every way possible, but they will not declare its government to be beyond the pale as a terrorist state, even though they say it commits terrorism all the time, because Chevron are the biggest American operator in Venezuela. And if they became illegal, then they wouldn't be able to operate. So the Americans have some good reasons to protect Chevron's interests in whatever else they do in Venezuela. And to attack the infrastructure. And I'm guessing when we find out what some of these targets are in Miranda and Aragua and Nagaria, I bet we'll find, I'm guessing obviously, but I bet we'll find that they are, as it were, government-related infrastructure, and that is an attempt, in a sense, to dismantle the realistic power of the government and persuade other people around Maduro to get rid of him. But of course, if the people around Maduro are persuaded to get rid of him, that doesn't mean to say that the regime will end, because a lot of people, as I've said, have got a very strong economic stake in the drug trafficking that goes on in Venezuela. The way Maduro buys loyalty from his troops is not through any appeal to nationalism, really. It's because he allows them to deal with the drug traffickers who traffic drugs from Colombia to the west of Venezuela through to the coast, where they send it mainly to West Africa and to Europe. And it's drug trafficking that the army are thoroughly involved in, and they turn a blind eye to all of that. And so the Del Sol group that the Americans claim is a great sort of narcotics empire. It isn't really. What it is a sort of a blind eye which the government turns to the military dealing with the drug traffickers for their own personal profit. And a lot of them, I mean, several thousand of them, will try to preserve that, even if Maduro is ousted by a group of young officers around him. So the Americans have got something of a problem here. I mean, having, as it were, intervened in this way, starting this morning, President Trump has now got to decide how much is he prepared to ratchet it up when he knows, everybody knows, that any ground operations in Venezuela, A, would be very difficult because it's a big country, population of 30-odd million people. So it's not like walking into a country of 4 or 5 million people. And B, would be very unpopular with his supporters, the idea that the United States might get involved on the ground in invading another country. That's exactly what the MAGA supporters wanted to put an end to after the last 10 or 15 years of US foreign policy.
And obviously, we've had this furious statement from the Venezuelan government in the last few minutes saying that they reject the military aggression, they call it, by the United States, although we should still stress no word from the US. The Pentagon and the White House have not commented at all. But just in the last few days, we did see President Maduro saying that he was open to talks with America on drug trafficking and oil after all this pressure that had been building up. I mean, is there some kind of diplomacy that is a possibility here, do you think, Michael?
Yes, there was. About a month ago, I mean, Maduro is basically offering the Americans anything. He said, in order to stay in power, he said, "Look, we'll do something different." He was making all sorts of overtures to Chevron, the American company who was dealing in Venezuela. He was saying that we will clamp down on trafficking. We will clamp down on this, that, and the other. We'll do extra deals with infrastructure. We'll get American companies in. We'll open to investment. He was prepared to offer the Americans more or less anything. And there was a sense about a month ago, 6 weeks ago, that the Americans might find that acceptable, and that President Trump would therefore be able to say, look, I've changed the nature of the relationship with Venezuela by bringing military pressure to bear. But then the Americans backed off from all of that. They said, no, we're not interested, because I think Trump decided that somehow he had to see this through, both against drug traffickers, and that's a longer term issue, and against Maduro, which is a short term issue. And remember, too, that Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, he is the son of Cuban exiles in Florida. He is vehemently, I mean, not just anti-Cuba, but anti-Maduro and anti-Venezuela. And Marco Rubio was crafting a lot of the diplomacy behind this policy. I mean, President Trump has gone along with an aggressive Pentagon policy, aggressive military policy, which is crafted by Pete Hegseth, who is inherently aggressive in the way he thinks the American military should be used. And the diplomacy was being crafted by Rubio. And it would take an awful lot to persuade Rubio that any remnant of Maduro or the Maduro regime should be allowed to remain in Venezuela once they've got them on the run. And so there is a sense, I think, that the Americans think if they could just dislodge Maduro, then events would take their course. And whether Maria Machado would then lead an opposition government would be a separate question. But that Venezuela would be, as we're released from this particular left-wing ultra dictatorship, which Maduro was put it into following Victor Chavez before him.
And just as you were speaking there, there has been some breaking news coming into us from Associated Press saying that the Federal Aviation Administration, America's Federal Aviation Administration, has banned US commercial flights in Venezuela airspace over what they are describing as ongoing military activity ahead of explosions in Caracas. What do you make of that, Michael?
Yeah, logical. I mean, the FAA were always. I mean, this proves that there's an air campaign going on. The FAA is saying, well, don't go there. I mean, get all civilian traffic out of the way. And that's what you'd expect them to say. But again, because the FAA is a government organization, the fact that the Pentagon and the White House have not commented yet is interesting in itself, I suppose. But the FAA can see what's going on, and their job is to look after civilian airspace. So they said, yep, there is something happening. Don't go near there. So, yeah, that just adds to the certainty that we can now see that as of today, this operation has gone into high military gear.
And what do you make of the fact that we've not had any word from the Pentagon and the White House? They must have endless requests for comment coming towards them, given the circumstances building up to these reports of explosions and the Venezuelan government's accusations towards the Trump administration. What do you make about the fact that we have had no comment?
Yeah, I mean, they always have lots of things lined up. If they're taking action, they've got all their statements lined up in advance, and they know what they're going to tell the press once the phone starts ringing. The fact that they're not commenting would indicate to me that there's more to come. That there's probably another wave of attacks likely, because they were obviously waiting until they can say this is what we have done. And what we've seen so far, and it's what is it now, 4 hours? So it's 4 o'clock in the morning in Venezuela. Is that right? Yeah, 4 o'clock in the morning there. So maybe there's more to come between 4 o'clock and 6 o'clock that they then will comment on. So again, I'm guessing, but I mean, if they are holding back on statements, it probably means that the first phase, as they see it, is probably still in play, still underway.